Travels by Broomstick comes to you from South Wales, the land of the dragon. Oh, and sheep. We got lots of sheep. Welcome to all you good people out there in podcast land. So, let's get the broomstick out the garage, and off we go.
Do you believe in fairies? They say that if you walk through Bluebell Wood and hear the sound of the bluebells ringing, then you will become pixie-led, entering into an enchanted trance-like state as the fairies lead you astray. I must admit that the sight and the intoxicating scent of these beautiful bell-shaped flowers growing wild in the ancient woodlands always fill my heart and mind with magic. The fairy folklore has always intrigued me, and while walking through the forest, I often imagine the fairy folk dancing around in the undergrowth. But what if we could photograph these mischievous fae?
Today's journey takes us to Cottingley, a village within the city of Bradford, in West Yorkshire, England, UK.
In 1917, Frances Griffiths was staying with her Aunt Polly, Uncle Arthur and cousin Elsie in the village of Cottingley. Elsie Wright was 16 years old and Frances was 9 years old. The two girls would often play together and their misadventures would take them to the stream that ran along the bottom of their garden called the Beck. The girls would return home with wet feet and wet clothing, much to their mother's annoyance. Frances and Elsie said that they only went to the stream to see the fairies that lived there. So to prove it, Elsie asked her father Arthur if she could borrow his camera. And after about 30 minutes, they returned home triumphant, having captured the photograph of dancing fairies. Elsie's father Arthur was a keen amateur photographer and he had set up his own darkroom to develop his photos. Arthur laughed at the photos and dismissed them as a prank. But 2 months later, Elsie asked if she could borrow the camera again, and they went off to Bluebell Wood. This time, they produced a photograph of Elsie on the lawn holding out her hand to a 1-foot-tall gnome. Towards the end of 1918, Frances sent a letter to her friend who lived in Cape Town in South Africa, named Joanna Parvin. She enclosed a photograph of herself and her magical encounter with the fairies. On the back of the photo, she wrote, "Elsie and I are friendly with the Beck fairies. It's funny, I never used to see them in Africa. It must be too hot for them."
These photographs became public in 1919 after Elsie's mother, Polly, attended a meeting of the Theosophical Society. This is a religious movement founded in 1875 by Helena Blavatsky, a Russian mystic, and Henry Steele Olcott, an American military officer, journalist, and Freemason. Theosophy teaches that the purpose of human life is spiritual emancipation and explains that the human soul undergoes reincarnation upon bodily death, according to a process of karma.
What do you think is the most important life lesson for someone to learn?
That karma's real.
The lecture that evening was about fairy life, and at the end of the meeting she excitedly showed the pictures to the speaker. Edward Gardner was one of the leading members of the society. He believed that humanity was undergoing a cycle of evolution towards increasing perfection, and the fact that these two girls had not only been able to see the fairies, but for the first time ever, fairies had been photographed. To him, this was a sign that the next stage of evolution was underway.
Edward Gardner sent the photographs along with the original negatives to a gentleman named Harold Snelling, who was an expert in photography. Snelling said that it was his opinion that the two negatives were entirely genuine, that these were unfaked photographs with no trace whatsoever of studio work involving card or paper models, stating that these were straightforward photographs of whatever was in front of the camera at the time. Gardner reproduced the prints, which were available for sale at his lectures.
Author and prominent spiritualist Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was famous for creating the character Sherlock Holmes in 1887, learned of the photographs from the editor of the spiritualist publication called Light. Doyle contacted Edward Gardner in June 1920 to determine the background of the fairy photos. He was utterly fascinated by them, and he wrote to Elsie and her father to request permission to use the fairy photographs for an article that he was writing for the Christmas issue of the Strand magazine. The article was all about the existence of fairies. Arthur Wright, Elsie's father, agreed to give consent for their use.
Gardner and Doyle sought a second expert opinion from the photographic company Kodak. Several of the company's technicians examined the photos of the girls with the fairies and agreed with Snelling that the photos had no signs of being faked, but said that this could not be taken as conclusive evidence that they were authentic photographs of fairies, and declined to issue a certificate of authenticity. In July 1920, Edward Gardner was sent to meet the Wright family by Doyle to place the matter of the photograph's authenticity beyond doubt. He returned to Cottingley with 2 cameras. He explained to the girls the simple workings of the camera and said that the girls may keep them. Gardner told the girls to return to the fairy glen and tice the fairies, as they called their way of catching them, to see if they could get more fairy photography. Francis and Elsie explained that the fairies would only come out in the right weather conditions and would not show themselves if others were watching. It wasn't until late August that the girls took several photographs, 2 of which appeared to show fairies. The first was a picture of Frances and a leaping fairy seen close to her nose, and the other was a picture of Elsie with a fairy tiptoeing on a branch offering her some harebell flowers. 2 days later, the girls took one last photograph, a picture of fairies in long grass like a fairy nest. The photographic plates were packed in cotton wool and sent to Edward Gardner in London. Gardner sent an ecstatic telegram to Doyle telling him about the new fairy photos. Doyle wrote back saying that his heart was gladdened to receive his note along with the 3 wonderful pictures, saying that when our fairies are admitted, other psychic phenomena will find a more ready acceptance. As an enthusiastic and committed spiritualist, Doyle hoped that these photographs would convince the public of the existence of fairies. In his article, Doyle wrote, "The recognition of their existence will jolt the material 20th century mind out of its heavy ruts in the mud and will make it admit that there is a glamour and mystery to life." But early press coverage was very mixed, although the issue of the Strand did sell out within days of publication because people wanted to believe in fairies, people wanted magic in their lives. Gardner made a final visit to Francis and Elsie in August of 1921, and the occultist Geoffrey Hodson, another member of the Theosophical Society, came along with him. Neither of the girls claimed to see any fairies on this visit, and there were no more photographs, but Hodson saw fairies everywhere, making copious notes on his observations.
Francis and Elsie were tired of the whole fairy business and admitted that they had played along with Hodson mainly out of mischief and considered him to be a fake. Public interest in the Cottingley Fairies gradually subsided after 1921.
In 1966, a reporter from the Daily Express newspaper tracked Elsie down and interviewed her about the photographs. She admitted in the interview that the fairies might have been figments of her imagination, but she left open the possibility that she somehow photographed her thoughts.
The media once again became interested in the existence of fairies and the photographs taken by Francis and Elsie. BBC Television's Nationwide investigated the case in 1971, but Elsie stuck to her story explaining that they were photographs of figments of her imagination. Numerous interviews followed over the years with both women denying that the photographs had been fabricated.
In 1893, in an article of the Unexplained magazine, Francis and Elsie admitted that the photographs had been faked, although both maintained that they had really seen fairies. They explained that Elsie had copied illustrations of dancing girls from the children's book, Princess Mary's Gift Book, published in 1914. She said that she added wings onto the dancing girls, and then the cardboard figures were cut out and held in position by hat pins. Once they'd finished with their fairy props, they then disposed of them in the Beck Stream. In a 1985 interview on the television programme Arthur C. Clarke's World of Strange Powers, Elsie said that she and Francis were too embarrassed to admit the truth after completely fooling author Arthur Conan Doyle, saying that they were just 2 village kids and a brilliant man like Conan Doyle, well, they could only keep quiet. In the interview, Francis said that they never thought of it as being a fraud. She said to this day she didn't understand why everyone was so taken in by them. They wanted to be taken in. They wanted to believe in fairies.
Francis died in 1986 and Elsie died in 1988. The prints of the fairy photographs, along with other items, including a first edition of Arthur Conan Doyle's book, The Coming of Fairies, were all sold at auction for £21,620 in 1998.
The 1997 films Fairy Tale, A True Story and Photographing Fairies were both inspired by the events surrounding the Cottingley Fairies. Just like Francis, I think that people wanted to believe in fairies. I believe in fairies, and all it takes is a little bit of faith, trust, and some pixie dust.
Well, that concludes our adventures with the fairies. I hope you've had a magical time. If you have, please like and subscribe, hit the bell, all the good things. See you next time as we travel by broomstick.